Ghostly winds do race. A fast cat's midnight dash. New Year's hush breaks fast. Here is how I made Turbo Granny. Hey everyone, I wanted to start off by saying happy holidays and happy New Year's. I hope everyone got to eat lots of good food, hopefully not any pears, and spend plenty of time with their friends and family. In 2024, we made many different builds of varying levels of absurdity, and 2025 is going to be even better because we'll be able to try out a bunch of different tools and build techniques that we never have before. One of the major resolutions I have for 2025 is getting better at 3D modeling. As many of you may know, I'm a Fusion 360 one-trick, and I've made many builds with that software, many of which are on this channel. However, Fusion 360 is really more geared towards functional parts. Think about electronics cases, frames, and mounts. Anything that has a more functional and even industrial use case is probably a good contender for software like Fusion 360. Where Fusion 360 isn't as popular is in artistic applications. Think about animations and video games where you have characters in these landscapes that have a much more organic and free-flowing kind of feel to them. These models that are a lot less Minecrafty and a lot more free would be a better use case for software like Blender. Blender is a free open source platform for 3D modeling, animation, rigging, and pretty much anything that you would ever want to do with freeform 3D models. Blender is run and maintained by the Blender Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and I respect them a ton because they're really focused on getting this software out to people in a very accessible way. It's totally free, it's totally transparent since it's open source, and unlike many corporations nowadays, they aren't focused on squeezing profit out of customers' butts every 2 seconds. Anyways, I find that I only really accomplish my New Year's resolutions when I make them specific. So for 2025, I wanted to make it my goal to become more comfortable with Blender. Okay, so Blender this, Blender that, where the hell is the cat? So step back with me for a moment and let's go back to around mid-December. When I was setting up the Christmas tree with my family, I checked within the box of ornaments and I found this little golden ball ornament. And it really reminded me of this. For those of you who don't know, this screenshot is from an anime called Dandadan, which has been very popular recently and is about high schoolers that are fighting demons and aliens. And this golden ball is this guy's balls. So essentially, there's a high school student who gets powers from this really fast grandma demon. And in that process, his balls become lost and golden. The grandma spirit is then sealed inside of this toy cat under the condition that she helps find his balls again. That explanation may not have been 100% clear and accurate, but it's about as much as I'm willing to try to explain in this video, so you're gonna have to just deal with it. All you need to know is that there is a cat named Turbo Granny, and that she has some relationship with this guy's golden balls. The point of all of this is that this Christmas ornament really reminded me of this scenario for some reason. And I decided it might be kind of funny to create a small version of Turbo Granny to go alongside the ornament to give it more meaning beyond just a golden ball. Okay, so usually here I hop into Fusion 360, but since we're designing a character this time, we're gonna hop into Blender. As a fair warning, I'm a complete noob at Blender. I don't really know anything about it. I think I got halfway through the donut tutorial like a few years back, but that's exactly why I'm trying to learn it. So let's do it. So first things first, I decided to start easy and just model the ball first, just so I actually knew how to create spheres in Blender. At first, I didn't even really know how to do this. I found that the general way to do this is to add a cube and then add a modifier to it called the subdivision surface modifier, which would basically split up the topology of the cube very granularly in order to create a sphere. The interesting thing that I learned is that a lot of Blender is actually just adding subdivision surface modifiers, as we'll see in a second. When it was time to start modeling Turbo Granny, I started out with the body, and in this case, instead of a cube, I started out with a rectangular prism. I then added a subdivision surface modifier, which made the body look more like this oval pebble shape, and it was slightly elongated just like the actual character's body in the show, and we were pretty much good to go from there after making some slight adjustments to the dimensions. Now it was time to add the legs, which was also kind of a similar process. Basically added a cube and then added a subdivision surface modifier to make it more spherical, Then I extruded it out to make this kind of stubby sausage looking thing that would essentially become the leg. And then I just added feet by adding yet another spear towards the end. And yeah, you're probably starting to notice a trend here where a lot of Blender is kind of adding cubes and adding subdivision surface modifiers. This is of course coming from a noob, and I'm only making really simple structures here, but this was kind of my first experience with the whole thing at least. The other modifier that I ended up using was the mirror modifier, which basically just reflects whatever you have across one axis over to the other side. And I used this so that I would be able to make the legs both symmetrical. As for the head, you probably guessed it already, but let's go ahead and throw a brick in and slam a subdivision surface modifier to make that thing round, and we get something that looks like this. Now that we have this Stewie Griffin-like structure, it's time to make this look less like Stewie Griffin and more like a cat by focusing on one of the distinguishing characteristics that we all know and love about cats, their ears. For this part, my usual strategy of just slamming some cubes and subdivision surface modifiers didn't really completely work. And so I actually did need to do some research in terms of how to do this from a technique perspective. I ended up finding this neat tutorial by a VTuber on YouTube available for free that just kind of goes over how to create this concave ear structure, and I just followed that pretty much to the T. I made some slight adjustments to the height and width, and that's pretty much it. I gotta say that one awesome thing about Blender, given that it's open source, is that a lot of people make really useful free content and tutorials on pretty much anything that you would ever want to do within the platform. So I can guarantee that if you're trying to make some kind of structure, if you just spend a few minutes looking on YouTube, you'll be able to find someone that is providing a tutorial on how to achieve something at least 90% similar to what you're trying to do. Anyways, after following that tutorial, I was able to get a pretty nice ear going on, and then I just used a mirror modifier to bring it to the other side as well. Moving on to the rest of the details for the body, we now needed to add a bell that's attached to her collar, and also a plate where the text goes. To make the front plate, I just made a really flat rectangle, and then I used something called the bevel modifier to actually round off the corners to make that more oval shape. And then I just moved that to connect it to her body, and we were pretty much good to go. For the bell, since it's another spear, you guessed it, we just slap another cube and a subdivision surface modifier. We make it a little tinier this time, and we just move it right in front of her neck, and we're pretty much set. Last but not least were the arms, and this was pretty similar to the legs. So we just add the cubes there, subdivision surface modifier. I'm getting sick of saying that, by the way. And we just extrude that out to create these arms in a nice little T pose going on here. Okay, so after the initial modeling phase, we now have Turbo Granny in this kind of T pose position, which is still pretty funny. But I wanted to have her be in more of like a lounging, resting position, like you can kind of see in a lot of her screenshots online. To do that, we need to give Turbo Granny some bones, or armatures as they're called in Blender. This process basically consisted of adding these little pointy looking things inside of Turbo Granny's body. The idea here is to mimic the joint structure of Turbo Granny as closely as possible so that we can make the movements look as natural as possible to the caricature. And as you can see here, the way that I accomplished that was making sure that we had a shoulder joint as well as an elbow joint, just like a cat would have, or at least Turbo Granny. I'm not sure if real cats have the same anatomy, to be honest, but at least for our use case, Turbo Granny has a kind of human-like structure. With the bones now configured, I was now able to manipulate Turbo Granny's arms in a way that wouldn't look really unnatural. I kind of just rotated her arms into different positions until I got something that I wanted. And I eventually ended up with something like this. It kind of looks like she's flexing here, but I thought that was also kind of funny, so I was just like, why not? And we just went with it. Okay, so now that we finally have a full 3D model, we just need to bring this thing out into real life. And for that, we're going to call over our good friends at pcbway. pcbway is your one-stop shop for anything PCB manufacturing and assembly. We've used a ton of their services on this channel to bring a lot of wacky projects to life, and we're going to be using them again to bring Turbo Granny into the real world. For this project, we'll be using their resin 3D printing services. The reason for that is that Turbo Granny is a pretty small figurine, and so we'll care about detail and having a nice finish on the print, and it also saves us a lot of post-processing that we would need to do if we were to use a technique like FDM. Now, personally, I don't have a resin printer at home because I don't want to worry about the fumes. but I'm still able to print with it just by filling out a form on PCBWay's website. Within a week of submitting my order, I already had this package come in from China. I actually ordered quite a few copies of Turbo Granny just in case I messed up the next part, which is painting, which we'll get to in a sec, but all of them came out really nice. I've used PCBWay's FDM 3D printing services before, and those were really high quality prints. It's awesome to see that their resin quality is also top notch. The finish is really clean, and I don't see any remnants of supports or anything like that. Another awesome thing about PCBWay is that they are wishing you a happy new year and are providing a New Year's sale up until January 12th, where you can get up to 50% off. So definitely throw in any projects that you have, get those things in, get those orders in, and bring them into the real world. If you're interested in using PCBWay for your next project, click the link in the description to learn more. Now that we have these strange little canvases ready, it's time for us to put our artist hats on and paint. Now, as another fair warning, I'm not just bad at Blender, but I'm also really inexperienced with anything artistic, so painting is going to be a challenge. To make things a bit easier for my noob self, I decided to invest a bit of money into some nice acrylic markers, which I was thinking would be a bit easier to wield than a paintbrush. However, I didn't do any research to verify whether acrylic markers would stick to 3D printed resin very well or not, so I basically just crossed my fingers and prayed to Turbo Jesus that this would just kind of work. I started out by coloring the collar first, and this is where I made my first mistake. I didn't realize that acrylic markers could be so watery, even though the box literally says water-based on it, and I put way too much, and as I tried to let it dry, it would kind of drip and made some mistakes that were almost impossible for me to clean up cleanly later. Oh well, life goes on, and art is not always clean. I then added the green accents under the collar and then proceeded to also fill in the base of the front plate as well as the yellow part of the bell. While that was drying, I got started on the part that I was dreading the most, the face. I was really scared about this part because my drawing is absolute trash and I have Parkinson's whenever I try to paint anything. I referenced some online photos to figure out which features to draw on the face that would make the most sense and ended up landing on this one in particular. As soon as I got started, I kept making mistakes on the eyes. I would either get the positioning wrong or they wouldn't be symmetrical, but luckily I also made a discovery around this time that rubbing alcohol on acrylic markers, or at least this set of acrylic markers, seemed to be okay at erasing things. This was a huge relief for me since it would mean I could still recover after a bunch of repeated mistakes. Eventually, after a bunch of errors and after going through almost like half a box of alcohol swabs, I was able to finally get something that I was pretty satisfied with. At this point, the collar and the plank were pretty much all dried, so I just took the same black acrylic marker and filled in the details such as the indentation on the bell as well as the Japanese text, and we were pretty much done. Overall, I think that for my first real Blender project, this didn't really go too badly, but there are definitely things that I would change if I were to go through this process again. First of all, when I was designing, I didn't really keep center of mass in mind, and as a result, Turbo Granny, due to the sheer size of her head, falls on her back every single time you try to place her sitting down, just kind of like a real old person does. Also, from the painting perspective, I wish that I went in with like a pencil or something beforehand and just kind of outlined the features beforehand so I could just trace them with the acrylic marker instead of having a stroke trying to get all the details right on the fly. But overall, this makes for a pretty nice addition to my little Christmas ornament and could also be a nice charm to put on a backpack or a bag or something like that. But if I were to use it for that use case, I'd probably spray her with some transparent seal so that she's more waterproof. I just don't think that the acrylic markers are very liquid safe right now. Thanks again to PCBway for sponsoring this video, and check out the link in the description to learn more about them if you want to use them for your electronics or 3D printing projects in the future. Finally, it would be irresponsible of me not to mention that Blender is kind of in a tough financial situation right now. FilmStop has a very good video talking about what's going on with the Blender Foundation that I would highly recommend that you check out. Given that the Blender Foundation is open source and they provided this really powerful tool for a bunch of 3D modelers, animators, and so on to build their careers on, many of which people are actually relying on to live right now, I definitely think that we should show them financial support in this tough time. So if you can donate and you have the means, please do. Any amount helps. I just want to note that I'm not affiliated with Blender or anything, but I'm a huge proponent of open source. I really believe in it. And I think when a company or organization has gone out of their way to provide this kind of extremely useful tool for everyone for free, we should definitely try to give back when we can. Thanks for watching this video and have a happy new year. Pear out.